Good morning, Grace Baptist Church, and Happy New Year. How many of you made it till midnight last night? Okay, about half. All right, good job. For the rest of you, you got a little bit more sleep than the rest of us. Let's all stand and sing page number 13. To start with, we'll sing the first and last of Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Bear me through the swelling tide. Let me on Canaan's side. Songs of praises I will ever give to thee. I will ever give to thee. All right, thank you so much. You may be seated, Brother Dave.
Matt, thank you, Miss Stephanie. Appreciate that. And good to have you here, and Happy New Year to you as well. It's good to see you. And it's kind of funny that Brother Matt chose that song whenever it said "Feed me till I want no more." That's like the perfect holiday song right there. And mission accomplished over the last week or two, and so that's very appropriate. We'll just say that. So thank you for that. Hey, if you got your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 14. That's what we're going to be looking at today. And it is good to have you here in Sunday school this year. And we're looking at some exciting things. We've got a few. I know normally, of course, I'll teach Sunday school class, and then from time to time, Brother Lohorn will fill in, Brother Tascarella will fill in on that one. We've got a couple other guys this year that will also fill in from time to time, and looking forward to that and giving them an opportunity. And I think that Sunday school has a purpose. And it's not just for us to add an extra hour onto our time at church. There's actually a point to it for us to come here to learn something. But not only that, but also Sunday school is also used to develop our church so that we can learn some of the lessons, some of the Bible that God has taught to different individuals in our church. And then also, of course, so many people who come and pass through, speakers and evangelists, missionaries. And so I just appreciate you being faithful here. I know that this is, New Year's Day. And so I know that there's some people who are sick. They called. In fact, we had to schedule some people for classes and things like that. And but I appreciate your faithfulness, and I know that we'll continue to grow this year. I wanted to talk about a few things this morning. Of course, last year we talked about what the qualities of an authentic Christian. This year we're probably going to look at a couple series, not quite as long, not 20 weeks on that one. Hopefully you'll have escaped any of that. But I wanted to look at, we'll do a couple series this year. But before we do all of that, then I wanted to kind of challenge us a little bit. And so this morning, actually listening, there's an evangelist. Some of you know him, Dr. J.C. House, and he was a mentor to my dad. And he has had a message on dealing with the storms of life. And it's very, very helpful. I think that it's appropriate, especially for whenever you start reviewing kind of your life and what's going in there. And so I wanted to take a little bit of that message and share some of that with you, kind of challenge you with that on there. And so that's what I wanted to start the new year with. Now, it's a little bit odd to start the new year talking about storms, but I think that for all of us, then we understand, well, some of you may be going through a storm. There may be something that you're carrying, a heavy burden that you're carrying. Now, you wouldn't be able to tell this morning because whenever you come in, you wish everybody a Happy New Year, and you just went through the holiday seasons. But some of you, for the first time, then you've gone through a holiday season without a loved one. Some of you, you've got stresses and worries that you've never had to deal with before. And then some things, they just linger. They just linger. And it makes it very, very difficult for us. And so with 2023 being a whole year in front of us, it's full of promise and what might come. This year we're praying for revival here at Grace Baptist Church. I think most of you are aware of that for the last several months. Then we've been talking about that and the importance of revival, not just in our lives, but in our community. Now, it starts with our life and then spreads into the community. So here at Grace, we're talking about that. We plan to expand our building. We expect to see more people join us in worship every week. Some of us made commitments in October to the missions program. Some of us are going to be challenged to make commitments to the building program that's coming up, financial commitments. Many of us made a commitment to pray for revival, to fast this year, or maybe it's just something where you just committed to faithfully attending God's house every single week. Some of you, last year was the first year that you made a major commitment to faithfully attend, and you've seen God work and grow. Some of you attended discipleship, different things that go on there, and we've all made commitments. The new year, a lot of times what we do, we step back, we take a look at it and say, you know what, I'm going to make New Year's resolutions. And then usually by February, we say, well, next year, I'm going to get really serious about this. And that's not something that we want to be as Christians. That's a human condition, but that's not something that we want to be as Christians. And so what I want to do is, whatever your commitment is, then especially if it's for the Lord, I hope you realize that whenever a commitment is made, then that is whenever the testing begins. Whenever a commitment is made, is whenever the testing begins. A lot of times, whenever we come to church, God will deal with our heart. We'll go to the altar, we'll kneel and pray there at our chair, or maybe if it's something that we struggle with, we'll take it home with us and we begin to pray. And whatever we do, then we finally surrender. And whenever we finally surrender, it's almost a sigh of relief. It's like, okay, I battled with the Lord on this one, but God, you won. You got it. And we think, now the hard part's over. But the truth is, it's just begun. Because up until that commitment, then really what you were doing is your will was battling with God's will. After the commitment is made, now all of a sudden you come on the radar. And now that's whenever the world, the flesh, and the devil begins to really aim at you and say, hey, listen, we're going to go ahead and test this one. If we can stop, and you see, the devil doesn't really care what he uses to get you out. Whenever I do the financial counseling, or whenever I go in and I talk to churches or to a men's retreat or whatever it is, one of the things that I always talk about, and if we do that this year, then I'll probably bring it up again, but one of the tools that the devil uses is bondage. And whenever I whenever I mention bondage, everyone has something that pops up in their mind. Some people will be like, yeah, there's some people, they can't get over alcohol. Or there's some people, they can't get over drugs. But the truth is, the devil doesn't care what he has to use to get you in bondage. He could use anger. You could just be mad at another church member. He could use bitterness. He could use debt. There's a lot of Christians in churches today that if a building program was presented, they could not in their budget commit to doing any more for the work of Christ because they've got so much debt that they're not able to do anything with it. And if you've ever experienced, or you're working through debt, and you've ever experienced that, you know that can be a bondage. He doesn't really care. Like I said, it doesn't make him any difference what he uses. As long as he can use something to get you to not keep that commitment, then that's what he does. So there will be testing of us here in 2023. And even though we don't know what 2023 holds, we know that life rarely goes as we expect it. If you've ever planned something, if you've ever gone on a week-long vacation, things don't always go. You can plan out everything that you want to, but it doesn't always work that way. And so 2023, even though it's full of promise, even though everything has potential there, then we also know that life is going to come a little bit different than what we expect on that one. As one preacher put it, that he would like to speak on how to avoid the storms of life. but he doesn't know how to, and the Bible doesn't tell us how to, and so we can't really talk about how to avoid the storms of life. What the Bible does help us understand is how to keep our commitments through the storms of life. Keeping our commitments through the storms of life. And so 2023, starting it off, here's what we want to talk about, is keeping our commitments that we've made to the Lord. Keeping our commitments that we've made to the Lord. And that's why we're in Matthew chapter 14. If you will, look in verse number 22. Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Now, this is after the miracle that Jesus had performed on feeding the 5,000. After he fed the 5,000, then in verse number 22, the disciples were standing there with him, and he said, straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him, saith, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased, and then they which were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. So verse 22 and through verse number 34, or verse 33 rather, tells a story about a storm of life. Now, there's a few things that I think that you need to understand about storms. So there's two different types of storms or uses for storms in our life, and that is this. One type of storm is a correcting storm, and the other type of storm that you're going to experience is a perfecting storm. There'll be a correcting storm, and there'll be a perfecting storm. Now, whenever it comes down to it, you may be, on January 1st, 2023, then you may be storm-free. Your life may be better than it's been in a long, long time. And if that's the case, I'm happy for you. I hope that's the case. I hope that the new year is starting off and everything's working out your way on that one. But let me just tell you, if that's the case, hang on, write it down, take notes, whatever you want to do. Keep this in your heart because something will come your way. I don't mean to be negative, but that's the way life works. We don't get away from something on that one. And so because of that, then I think that we need to just recognize whenever storms come in our life, then there's two types of storms. There's a correcting storm, and then there's a perfecting storm. A correcting storm example of that would be the book of Jonah. If you start reading the book of Jonah, you'll see where God had to correct Jonah. He asked Jonah to go down to Nineveh. Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh for good reason. The Ninevites persecuted his people. They killed them. He did not like them. And they didn't like him either, if that helps you at all. And he didn't want to go there. And God told him to go there and pronounce judgment, tell him that they had 40 days until it was going to be wiped out. Jonah refused to do that. He went on a ship, and whenever he did, you know the story, how that a storm came, and he drew the short straw, and they said, cast me overboard. And God prepared a great fish, and that's where Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the whale, or the great fish. And that was all for correcting. Now, the truth is, Jonah repented. He went there, he preached. Whenever he did, the people of Nineveh repented. The whole city repented. And Jonah was upset again. Remember that? And he said, I knew you were that kind of God. I knew you were going to spare them if they repented. He was so upset that God spared 200,000 people. He wanted to see them die. He wanted judgment to come on them. And it was a correcting storm. That's what it was, a correcting storm. And then there's a perfecting storm, and that's whenever you look at the story of Job. And the story of Job is there's a conversation in heaven that Job knows nothing about. The devil said, hey, listen, I've been going along men and all these, and, they all don't, none of them love you, none of them care about you. And he said, have you considered my servant Job? And he said, well, of course. Job's going to do that because look at how you blessed him. You've given him a wonderful family. You've given him all this wealth. You've given him good health. You've done all of these things for him. If you let me touch Job, I guarantee you that he'll turn on you. And God said, okay, just don't kill him. Just don't kill him. And you know the story. Job, one day, lost 10 children. 10 children. That was a dark day. Lost all of his wealth. His wife comes to him and she looks him in the face and tells him, say, why don't you just curse God and die? And then, finally, Job has conversations with God. Job doesn't understand. His friends come there. His good friends came there and told him, they said, Job, we don't know what sin you've got hidden in your life, but we know you've got a terrible one because this is the way God works. God only judges people who are wrong. They didn't understand that there's a perfecting storm. And so whenever the storm came, then Job finally said, though he slay me, yet will I serve him. Though he slay me, yet will I serve him. And then you know the end of the book whenever it says that Job prayed for his friends and God gave him twice of what he had before. But that storm was not a correcting storm. Job was already loved the Lord. He already sacrificed. That was a perfecting storm. And what he had to do is he had to come to a realization that the Creator was more than the creature. And that was finally a realization for him. And so that's the two types of storm in there. So let's just look at it as an example just for a few minutes. Let's just see what God has for us here in Matthew chapter 14. In Matthew chapter 14, the first thing I want you to see about keeping our commitments in 2023 is that in verse number 22 of Matthew 14, it says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side. So you need to understand that the first thing is God's providence placed you here. God's providence placed you here. I do not think that it's an accident that you are here at Grace Baptist Church January 1st, 2023. Now, this may not be your home church. This may not be the church that God has for you for the rest of your life. I do not know, but I do know this, that it is not an accident that you are here this morning for this service. And if you allow God to use this service, he will use it in a way that you did not expect. Not because I'm here, not because of a lesson, not because of the pastor. It's none of those things. It's because God has prepared a place for you, and he wants to work in your life. He wants to work in your life, and God's providence has placed you here. And we're not here by accident. Nothing has come to you that did not cross the desk of God. Now, if you want to talk about a challenge of faith, then you need to think about that. Nothing in your life has come to you that did not cross the desk of God. It doesn't mean that that's what God wanted for you. In fact, we complicate many things, right? We disobey God, we sin, we do things, we make bad choices. All these things complicate our life, but you realize that everything has gone over the desk of God, and that means that if it's gone through the desk of God, ultimately, what God wants to use every circumstance, whether we mess it up or not, he wants to use that for our good and for his glory. And so God's providence has brought you here. So where you are, what you have today, what you choose to do with today, God can use and turn it into a blessing. Even the darkest trial that you've walked through, then God can choose it and make it a blessing. So God's providence, didn't Jesus tell the disciples to get in the boat and go across? Do you think it was a surprise to him that a storm was going to come up? Not at all. Not at all. But he still told them to get in the boat and to go across the other side on that one. So first one is God's providence placed me here. The second one is God's prayer protects me here. In verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. There's a mirror passage in Mark chapter 6 of Matthew chapter 14. And it says, and when he had sent them away, he departed into a mountain to pray. Jesus took that time to pray. I don't know if you know this or not, but whenever Christ went to heaven, do you know what he's in heaven doing right now? He's an advocate for you. An advocate for you. Whenever I used to work in the asphalt industry, then every single year, if you're in management, you got a letter that came in there and said, hey, listen, we've got a lobby group, and we'd like for you to contribute to this. And there's a big thing between asphalt and concrete. You may not know that. There's some states that use concrete, and they pave interstates with concrete. And that's the reason why whenever you drive through there, you get beat half to death. But that's what they do. And then the other side is asphalt. You can tell which side I'm on. So on the asphalt side of it, where they use asphalt, and what ends up happening is they try to collect millions and millions of dollars so that they can advocate for more use and for the DOTs to use asphalt and them to pave more roads and to do a lot of infrastructure, all of these different things on there. And so they ask us to contribute money for that. And whenever we do, then there's a lobby group that's up there that does who knows what, legal bribing, I think is what they call that. And so they legally bribe congressmen to go ahead and set all these things up, and they advocate for whatever it is that you want. And it costs you money, and sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. And here we are as Christians, and we have an advocate with the Father. The creator of the universe knows who you are, and he has someone there who says, hey, you know what? I'd really like to see something good happen in their life. Whenever you pray, even whenever you don't understand, sometimes we don't even know what to pray, right? What does the Bible say? That the Holy Spirit will help us. It'll utter things that we don't even know to pray. Things we don't even know that we need, and God is constantly at work, and we have an advocate with the Father who is praying for us, and it's a reminder that God's prayer protects us here. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 1, it's where it says, my little children, these things write unto you, that ye sin not. That's a pretty big statement, isn't it? That you sin not. And if any man sin, that's us. Here we go. We get mentioned almost by name. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. It's on the right hand of the Father, and he's advocating for you and I. So God's providence placed you here. God's prayer protects you here. And then thirdly, God's presence comes to you where you are. God's presence comes to you where you are. The storm that threatened him, if you noticed, what the disciples were worried about, the winds, the waves, the water, everything on there, the storms that threatened them became the pathway Jesus walked on to get to them. The very storm, what they were afraid of, is what Jesus was walking on to get to them. In verse 25, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And the mirror passage in Mark chapter 6 and verse 48, it says this, whenever he was praying, it says, and when he saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them, and about the fourth watch of the night he cometh unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. So what ends up happening is God's presence comes to you where you are. In 2023, I don't know where you are. I don't know where you are in your mind. I don't know where you are in your emotions, in your spiritual walk. Don't know where you are physically, but I can tell you this, that wherever you are, God will come to you. His presence will come to you in that one. It's an interesting thing because there's a principle. The principle is this: problems bring him closer to us than prosperity ever will. Problems bring him closer to us than prosperity ever will. In Psalms 34, verse 18, it says, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Do you know if you're going through a storm or you're going through a difficult time, do you know that you're closer to the Lord than you've ever been? But do you know what it takes? A contrite spirit. Oh, he's nigh unto those with a broken heart. If you already have a difficult time, if your heart is already broken, can I tell you, God is wanting to help you. But what it takes is a contrite spirit. All you've got to do is surrender. Just surrender. Whenever we do that, that allows God to work in our life. You know what the Bible tells us, and I think this is probably one of the greatest hindrances for Christianity, at least in America. God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. You know what Christianity, American Christianity, is full of? Pride. Pride. Contention cometh not but by pride. And do you know what churches, Baptist churches, are full of? Contention, right? Full of contention, which means we have a pride problem. And here it is, God's very own church, he's having to resist them because of their pride. And if we'll get away from that, if we'll resist that, if we'll turn around, if we'll be humble, then God will draw nigh to us. And so God's presence will meet you where you are in that one. Now, an interesting thing God knew that a storm was coming. God knew that it was going to be a great trial of faith for the disciples. And yet Jesus waited until they're in the middle of it, the fourth watch of the night, before he walked up to them. He could have helped them avoid it. He could have told them, hey, don't leave today. There's going to be a storm tonight. Let's do something else. But there's something that's called a divine delay. A divine delay. Here's what happens. Whenever you get in a storm, if God immediately gave you the power to get out of that storm or to figure it out or to work through it, then we would do it. As Christians, you know what we typically do? We try really, 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 really hard to solve our own problems. And if we can't, then we'll go to someone else. And then they'll try. And if we got good friends or a good church, or they'll help us, and we'll just try to just limp along. Not ever seeing the power of Christ, not ever seeing God really do a work. We're just surviving. And we're good people working really hard just to survive the Christian life. And what we say is, one day it's all going to get better. And we're in our own resources, our own power, our own resources, everything that we're doing. I've got a good friend who's helping me through this. I've got the resources. It's cost me more than what I thought it was going to, but I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to get this. I'm going to do these things. And in our own power, then we're going to try to make it. And what God did is that divine delay, he allowed them to exhaust all their resources. They realized that if something didn't happen, they may not make it. And sometimes God allows these storms in our life to let us realize that it's not about us. If they had made it, then whenever Jesus would have gotten over to the other side, Peter would have been like, Lord, it got rough. You should have been there. It was tough. But between John and I and the rowing that we did and all the experience that we've got, and, we're master seamen. We knew all of these things on there. We finally made it through, but it wasn't easy. You should have been there. And sometimes as Christians, you know what we do? We say, man, we got a good church. We've got a beautiful property. We've got a good pastor. We've got a wonderful piano player, and we've got a friendly church, and we've got all of these things. And it's not easy, and maybe we're not reaching the community, but, man, if you come in here, we do everything we can do. Does God get the glory for that? Good folks, good people. We can talk about all of us that we want to, but really God is interested in getting the glory. In Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 18, God says this to his people. He says, therefore will the Lord wait. Therefore will the Lord wait. Now in this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 30, what he's talking about, they're not in a good time. But in verse 18 it says that the Lord is going to wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will he be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you, for the Lord is a God of judgment. Blessed are all they that wait for him. The Lord wants to be gracious to you, but you know what he's going to get out of that? The glory. That he will be exalted. And so whenever it comes to it, then sometimes what God will come to us, his presence will come to us, but only after divine delay. Because for some reason we're hard-headed, we're stubborn, and we are going to try to figure it out. And sometimes it just takes us a little bit more time, and God has to leave us in that storm a little longer so that we realize it's not of us, it is of him that we are not consumed. So the first one is God's providence placed me here. The second one is God's prayer protects me here. God's presence comes to me where I am. And then the next one is God's power will sustain me here. Verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying it was a spirit, and they cried out for fear. Of course, you know the story. Let me go through this very quickly. There are three more miracles that were performed that night. First one is obvious. Jesus was walking on water. You may not realize that that's kind of a big feat, but that's a pretty big deal. And you could make a lot of money if you could do that. But that was miracle number one, that Jesus was walking on the water. The second thing is that Peter, who he leads everything mouth first. Then Peter, as soon as he sees him, then he's like, Lord, if it's really you, let me walk on the water. Peter must have been a very, very interesting character. I don't think I would have thought of asking for that, but that's how his proof was. I've been like, calm the seas or get in the boat. Lord, let me see you. No, Peter's like, hey, let me walk out there too. And but that's a second miracle. It's a unique thing. that happened. And then the third miracle is that the wind ceased and the waves ceased whenever Jesus got in the boat. So there's three miracles that happened there, and all of those were just indications of God's power. Last week in the service, whenever we were talking about it, and we talked about the prophecy of the birth of Christ and how that's just an indication of an amazing God. All it was is just to highlight the power of God, that he can prophesy, that he can perform, that he's going to. Now, this is before he did any miracles. This is just to show you what an amazing God you have. And do you know that he is interested in you? In you. He would like to spend time with you. If you would take the time every single day to call on him, he would sit and talk with you. He'd sit and talk with you. Your own family doesn't have time sometimes to do that. And yet the creator of the universe would like to spend time with you every day. And so God's power will sustain you there. Then lastly, God's promises assure us here. God's promises assure us here. Verse 27, he says, "But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." So here's what you know. Whenever God makes a promise, can I tell you that is something that you can rest in? The value of a promise, I've said this many times, is always tied to the character and ability of the one making the promise. The value of a promise is always tied to the character and the ability of the one making the promise. If someone whenever we were kids, we used to say, we would bet $1 million. Now, I get up the stairs faster than them or whatever it was in that one, But none of my brothers or my sister who's here today, none of them have ever claimed that $1 million from me. You know why? One, I like the character. Two, I like the money. But even if I had the money, they still wouldn't be claiming it because I would not pay up on the bet that I made whenever I was a kid. And many of us, you know what we do? We kind of treat God like that. God makes all these promises and be like, wouldn't it be cool if it was true? And it is. And it is. The character and the ability of God is unlimited. And yet we live like the promises that he's given us are kind of a wish. Wouldn't it be cool if what the Bible said was really true? But it is. And so God's promises can assure you there. In Psalms chapter 37, verse number 5, it says, "Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass." And he shall bring it to pass. Here's what I'd like to challenge you with this year. This year, we don't know what's going to happen. This could be the best year you've ever had, and I hope it is. Or this may be the toughest year you ever have. It might be. Either way, whether it's the best or if it's the worst, it really won't matter because God is in control. And everything that you're going to go through in 2023, pass through God's desk. And God is wanting to show himself strong on your behalf. That's what the Bible says. That's a promise that he's made. And all he asks from you is for you to submit to his will. Just to submit. You say, I don't know what the future's going to hold. I don't know how much work it's going to be. God didn't ask you to go ahead and commit to all that. All he's asked you to do is walk with him. He says here, commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. You see, what we want for Grace Baptist Church, we want to see revival. We want to see people saved. We want to see growth. We want to see an addition put up. We want all of these things. In our own life, you've got what you want to see. And the truth is, we're going to work really, really hard to make it happen. And if God's a part of it, that's great. But if he's not a part of it, we're still going to work really, really hard and try to do it. Why don't we reverse that? Why don't we put God in charge of it? Because he's the one that's going to bring it to pass. In your life, in our church, in your emotions, in the hard times. Why don't we wait on God and allow him and realize that really, even though we can work really hard, we're not getting anywhere. And whenever he calms it, you'll know it's him. It's him. And that's how we can keep the commitment that we made in 2023. All right, our time's up. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to thank you again for today. Lord, I pray that what was said this morning would be an encouragement. Lord, I know it's about storms, about maybe difficulties in our life, but really it's more about you. Lord, and what you've promised us, Lord, and what you've taught us, Lord, what you help us to understand is that we have to rely on you. Or not just for salvation, but also for just walking everyday life. Lord, I pray that you would help us, Lord, that we would surrender, Lord, that we would realize it. Give us understanding, Lord. Help us to commit to walking after you, Lord. I pray that you'd do something special, Lord, in each heart that's here this morning. Lord, I pray that you'd speak to us, Lord, that you would help us, Lord, that we would follow after you, Lord, but that you would just give us a blessing, Lord, to just reassure us, Lord, remind us, Lord, that you're in control. Lord, I thank you for this church. Lord, I thank you for the people that are here. I pray that you would just bless us, speak to us in the next service. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right, we've got about 20 minutes. I believe there's